Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Barbara Jackson, and I'm the director of the Burns School of Real Estate and Construction Management at the University of Denver in the Daniels College of Business. And I'm here today to talk to you about ethics in construction. Construction is an industry and a field that I've been involved with all of my professional career for about 30 years now. And then some 20 years ago, I got involved in teaching construction management. I started teaching first at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, California, and I'm very happy to say that I've been at the University of Denver for about 7 years now. So what I'm here to share with you today is just some information or a perspective on ethics in the industry that I really think is very fitting for the times that we're in. The industry as a whole, the construction industry, has been changing and transforming over a number of years, probably more than 2 decades. And that's kind of the perspective that I want to bring to it all. And I want to talk to you really about the importance of construction and the importance of ethics in that industry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and I'll bring up my slides and we'll get started. Here we go. All right, so as I said, I've been involved in the construction industry for quite some time. And ethics, quite frankly, has been something that's kind of been dear to my heart for probably since the day that I got into the business. I've always felt that construction was a very, very noble industry, and it was filled with really good, well-intended, hardworking people. And that's what I still believe today, probably more than ever before. Now, I've written a book in the past. I wrote the first edition in 2004 and the latest edition just this year. And the name of that book is called Construction Management Jumpstart. And the reason I bring it up is because I put a chapter in that book, and the name of that chapter is It's Just Construction. And when we really think about it, just construction, it's like, really? Of course it's more than that, because the fact is that without construction, there would be no civilization in general, and society as it exists today simply wouldn't exist. Nothing would exist without construction. So it's a pretty significant industry. The truth is, housing, commerce, education, healthcare, manufacturing, transportation, recreation, worship, wherever you look, without construction, none of that would exist. I actually challenge you to, when you step outside the next time, just step outside, do a 360-degree turn, and take a look at everything you see. Because everything you see, again, would not exist if it weren't for construction. So it's pretty significant. Now, ethics is nothing new to the construction industry. As a matter of fact, the first code, if you will, or ethics code or building code or whatever you want to call it, the first code that ever existed in this industry was called the Code of Hammurabi. And it came about in 1854 BC, and that's a long time ago. It was a fairly harsh code, as a matter of fact, and basically what it said, if you are in this business of designing and building, constructing in any way, shape, or form, if you were in that business, then if you created something, if you built something that had any kind of a failure whatsoever, perhaps a failed column or a piece of roof section that might have collapsed, then your punishment for building something that wasn't able to stand up, your punishment was to be put to death. So that's one heck of a penalty. That's one heck of a penalty if you don't do it well. So you can see how the construction business has been linked to ethics and standards and quality for a very, very long time. Now, the person, because it was a person at that time, it wasn't a team, it was a person, but the person or the profession, if you will, that was responsible for doing this work, who was held to this code, this very strict code, was referred to as a master builder. And historically, the master builder was considered the central figure that ensured that quality construction work took place. This person had an in-depth knowledge of how to use various materials. He also crafted designs and directed the work and often participated in the actual manual labor. So the master builder is what today, the master builder was the embodiment of what today we would refer to as the architect, the engineer, and the contractor. So that single person was accountable for all of it. And that was a pretty big accountability. But what had happened over the years, actually still in the Renaissance period of time, is that there was such a demand for building to keep going and to progress even further and further and further, that at some point, there was a period of time when they decided to separate design from construction. So we started to see the diminish of the master builder. They no longer held all the accountability for whatever they created as a whole, in a holistic fashion. And we started to see what I call the segregation of services or professional services associated with the construction business. And that actually started back in the Renaissance as well. And then in the 1850s, we began to see even more separation of those professional services. And as you can see on this slide, it started with the engineers, the civil engineers. They kind of created their own association. And then we went to the AIA, the American Institute of Architects. And then we started to see the general contractors separate from one another. So as we started to see this rise of these professional societies in the 1850s, what we also began to see is less and less of a perspective regarding ethics, that there was an accountability for the whole. Instead, we started to see that there was a very fragmented perspective regarding who's responsible for what. And it was good on one side, but it wasn't so good on another side. And then later on, we're going to talk about what happened later on in the 1970s, the 1980s, 1990s, and today. And both of these periods of time, the 1850s to the 1960s, and then the 1970s to the 2000s, both of those had an impact on how we look at the bigger picture of ethics in construction. So this rise of professional societies, the good points, we had greater professional specialization, that's good. We had an increase in specialized knowledge. There was a promotion and advocacy of professional interest in markets. But at the same time, some of the negative was that there was a rise in conflict of interest issues. And frankly, the blame game began. And we started to see sort of, again, there was the concept of a holistic accountability started to get more and more fragmented. So in essence, the master builder was no more. We didn't have an individual that was solely accountable for the whole process. Today, we have engineers, we have architects, and we have constructors and construction managers. Now, this caricature, by the way, that you see, I have to attribute it to a student that I had some years ago. They decided to create their own stereotype or stereotypical character, or caricature, I should say. And I always quiz people. I bet you can't guess who's who, but almost everybody does when I tell them what their choices are. So today, this is what we have. We have separate professional services. We don't have the concept of a single person being what was then the master builder of old. So what happened? Okay, well, what happened is we started to create sort of this tug of war approach to ethics. Each individual discipline, the engineers, the architects, the constructors, they ended up pressing for their own points of view and their own agendas. Today, it's not uncommon for architects to press for enhanced design while discounting budgets and schedules, for example. And contractors press for budgets and schedules while sometimes discounting design enhancements. Well, here's the challenge for us all. The clients that we work for and the owners that we build for, they want the whole thing. They don't want us, really, they don't want us sort of separating into separate tents to oversee just one piece of their facility. They want an integrated solution, and they want a holistic perspective regarding the accountability for the work, all of it, the design, the engineering, the construction, the operations, all of it. They want an accountability for it all. And that's the ethical approach they would like for us all to take. The process that we're talking about, where it's segregated services, is called, there's a process, and that process is called design, bid, build. And design, bid, build has been our very traditional, for a very long time, our traditional model, if you will, of how we design and construct buildings. It's a very linear approach. We first design it, a team of architects and engineers design it, then they complete their work, then we put that project out for bidding for cost, and then after that is done, we go ahead and hire a contractor to build it. So it's very linear in nature, and it's really, really a model that looks like sort of this siloed mentality, where one party finishes up and then tosses it over to the next party who does their part, and they toss it over to the next group and they do their part. But what this has caused in our industry is sort of this challenge when you think of the big picture and ethically how we address that, how we relate in that, how we participate in that. So the process itself, the design, bid, build process itself, it became a systemic, or it created systemic issues related to all kinds of things associated with ethics. So this segregated services model, with every party having a separate contract, led to more conflicts, the blame game, and everyone positioning to avoid accountability. Because, quite frankly, it was a challenge for anyone who had a contract if they wanted to put more, if they wanted to oversee more than just their part. It became an issue because they weren't allowed actually to oversee other parts beyond their contract. So what developed was sort of this every man or every woman for themselves mentality. It took over. And, you know, when you look at this image, the issue with it is, you know, it really doesn't matter. If this is your project and you're the client, it really doesn't matter whose end of the boat the holes are in. The whole boat is going down. So it kind of started to, again, separate us as professionals instead of bring us together to take that larger perspective of the project overall, or the accountability for the project overall, and the ethics that are associated with that. So what happened from that master builder concept to more current day was our ethical perspective became more legalistic in nature, okay? We began to lose track of our significance and impact. As I told you, nothing exists without us, nothing in society. So when we began to lose track of our overall significance as an industry and our impact, it also affected our ethical perspective. Our accountability became diminished. Our focus as a construction industry was directed to the contract issues associated with just the program for the building, which is sort of the scope of work, and the project aspects itself. So what we became most interested in, or most accountable for, was the schedules and the budgets and the quality and the safety and the efficiencies and protecting profits, because that's what was in our schedule. But the holistic perspective of the project was not necessarily our accountability. It was just our part. And in construction, our part is the schedules and the budgets and the quality, etc. It's not the design, for example. So it did have an impact on how we view ethics in the business. And the best way I like to share this is when we think of any project, there's the design phase, there's the construction phase, there's the operations and maintenance phase, and then there's the organizational cost associated with running whatever that facility is that we're working on. And let's say it's a hospital in this case. And then there's the actual healthcare outcomes. But what happened is, as we fragmented as an industry, we started to separate ourselves from the ultimate impacts that our work in construction can create. And even if we didn't design those impacts, so to speak, or create the design for the facility, and we're just following orders, so to speak, we're building per plans and specs, we still need to have an accountability somewhere along the way for what the outcomes are of that project. But because we're all tied so strictly to these separate contracts, this became more and more difficult, and quite frankly, more and more contentious, more and more contentious. And it's kind of a big deal, again, because when you look at any construction, if you look at any construction out there between design and construction, the bulk of the cost, about 70% of that cost of any kind of project, is the construction cost. It's only 8% for equipment, 3% for systems, 2% post-construction, 7% for pre-design and due diligence, and 10% for design. So if we go back and you look at this picture, it's kind of like construction. Its impact, if you will, on the outcomes is minuscule compared to the actual cost of what we are inputting into the project. The other thing we need to consider is that U.S. buildings, the building construction and buildings, when we create buildings, all kinds of buildings and projects, whether they're vertical or whether they're horizontal like highways, they take up a lot of resources. So 12% water use, 39% buildings are accountable for 39% of CO2 emissions. 65% of waste output totally comes from the construction industry, and buildings account for 71% of electricity consumption in the United States. So when you look at all of these, you can begin to see the massiveness, if you will, of the impact of construction. And so when you think about that and you think about ethics, you've got to begin to understand that it cannot just be about what's in that contract, because the contract is the contract, but there's things that we do that will have an impact that lasts a very, very long time. So in developing this more legalistic ethical perspective, we really focused on contracts and regulations and requirements and law. Some of the more common systemic issues began to minimize actually sort of our personal responsibility or accountability. So some of these systemic issues in the design, bid, build process, some of them had to do with the bidding process itself. Bid rigging is something that you may have heard in the news every now and then. Bid shopping might be another ethics issue that you might hear about every now and then. Bid rigging is where any set of contractors, for example, could get together and among themselves decide that they're all going to give the same price to the client, and it might be an elevated price, but they're going to do that and kind of take their turns and who gets the work. But bid rigging is actually illegal. It's not just unethical, it's illegal. Bid shopping, on the other hand, is something different. It's not actually illegal, but many of us in the construction business feel that it's unethical. So here's one fundamental concept I want everyone to understand. That it's legal doesn't mean that it's not unethical. And bid shopping is one of those instances. And bid shopping is when all the subcontractors, for example, have submitted their pricing for a piece of the work, legitimately so, but the general contractor decides after they get all of those bids that they're going to go shop it. In other words, they're going to go to one person and say, hey, the lowest bid is, you know, $140,000. Will you do it for $138,000? That's called bid shopping. Again, it's not illegal, but it's considered by many to be unethical. So that's in the area of low bid process. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute because I think that in itself is a problem. So payment processes, here's a couple others. There's something in the construction business called retainage. And what retainage is, it's a percentage of the contract amount that is withheld throughout the entire duration of the project from the contractor. So the owner holds back. It's usually about 10%. Now, what that has caused is a number of issues in terms of how people are paid in the construction industry, because the typical profit margin in, say, commercial construction is only 1, 2, 3, maybe 4%, okay? So if the owner's withholding 10% and the profit for the contractor is only 4%, then that means the contractor is actually financing, not officially, not legally, but really carrying the financing for the project. And not only that, they're restricted in how they can pay their subcontractors. But it's legal and it's very common. Retainage is very common. And because of that, they've actually had to create some legislation around pay when paid clauses, for example. And a pay when paid clause simply says when the general contractor is paid a progress payment, as the construction develops, they're paid in progress payments along the way, every so many, 30 days, 60 days, whatever it might be. And so what it says is when the general contractor is paid by the owner, that at that time, they must also pay their subcontractors. And what would happen is that the general contractor was get paid by the owner, but then they would withhold payments from their subcontractors because they needed the cash flow to move the project forward in some cases. So that caused, like I said, that caused a problem. So that's no longer, in many states, that's no longer allowed. If you get paid, you have to pay your subs. But the retainage issue, part of the problem is that the retainage is actually more than the profit margin in some cases. Take a sip of water there. There's something else called, excuse me, there's something else there called front-end loading. Front-end loading, most general contractors do it. It's a process that's done during the application for payment process. And what it does, it allows the contractor to request payment for materials that have been delivered to the site, for example, or ordered and paid for, but they haven't actually been installed into the work. Now, again, front-end loading, some people may see that as unethical. Others don't see it as unethical. They actually see it as a best practice of business, and almost every general contractor does it. What I'm trying to share with you here is how the system itself, the design, bid, build system itself, and the system with retainage in place, that process or that policy of holding a retainage is what causes some of the general contractors to front-end load, because they don't have enough cash flow to actually cover the items that they have to buy in advance. For example, I'll give you an example. Steel is usually on any large commercial project, if it's a steel structure, then contractors have to purchase that steel, order it and purchase it very, very early on in order to have it in time by the time they actually need it. So that's a cash outlay for the general contractor. So they will try to front-end load that payment to get paid by the client up front and early before the steel is installed. Again, gray area, perhaps, but it's one of those things that I think part of the problem or the challenge with it all is that the practice of retainage causes a lot of these things to not go smoothly. Other types of ethical issues that we see as conflicts of interest, and again, the blame game. And so much of that is related to this fragmented process of how we do one operation like design first, then a second one, then a third one, and they're not really connected. So it has a tendency to have one party blame another party. The other thing I really want to talk about is I want to talk about the low bid mentality, because I think personally, I think this is one of the worst things that ever happened in the construction industry. The low bid mentality and that concept of go seek the lowest bidder. Now that may seem like a sound business practice, but the reality of it is when the construction business becomes so competitive and people are trying to get your work, they'll take a lot of steps to be the low bidder, because if they're not the low bidder, they won't get the work at all. And that's when you begin to see, not all contractors, but some contractors may give you pricing that really is actually below market. They do whatever they can to get their prices low enough to win the work, in some cases just to keep their people busy, just to keep them working. And here's the problem with it. A client who keeps insisting on a lower and lower bid, they're actually putting themselves in quite a risk position. I've always said there's nothing more dangerous than a contractor who's losing money. And the fact is, often in this business, I hate to say it, that contractors will sometimes go into a project below cost, actual cost to get the work, and then they may add a lot of change orders to the client, which they don't like either, added expenses along the way. But the system itself is what's causing some of that. As I've said, the most dangerous position a client can be in is with a contractor who's losing money. And who that contractor typically is that low bidder. And the client demanded a low bid, that's what they got. And you've heard the expression, you get what you pay for. But here's the thing. People, there's not all this built-in, some people think there's all this built-in extra surplus money or big, huge profits, but it's just not so. It's just not so. Cost is cost is cost. And I've always said it's far more important to get the right price than the lowest price. You need to seek the right price, not the lowest price. Okay. All right, so the low bid mentality, here's the thing. The bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten. Just something to live by there in the construction business. So because we lost the concept of the master builder, we kind of became more like order takers rather than value generators. And construction began to be viewed as nothing more than a commodity. And a commodity, a good or service whose wide availability and lack of differentiation diminishes the importance of factors other than price. So commodity drives price competition, not a good thing. Not a good thing for the clients and the owners we serve, and not a good thing for the construction companies. So we want to become more value generators, more than just order takers. So we want to kind of move back towards this master builder concept. And that's exactly what happened starting in the 1970s, really. In the 1970s, we started to see the development of some other professional associations, but these were multidiscipline associations. So the CMAA, for example, the Construction Management Association of America, they invited constructors, of course, but they also invited other parties like architects. The US Green Building Council in 1993 a multidisciplined association, architects, engineers, contractors, owners. Then in 1993, again, the Design Build Institute of America came about, and that too is a multidisciplined. We're all coming back under the same tent again. LCI, Lean Construction Institute, absolutely the same thing again. And not only that, with the Lean Construction Institute, we started to really look at value versus just cost. In other words, how do we start moving away from a couple things that really kind of hurt us as an industry? And one of those is that segregated services mentality. And the second thing, which brought us design, bid, build. And then that second thing was that low bid mentality. So the LCI in particular and the Design Build Institute both started to look at value versus cost. And then most recently, we have the Construction Users Roundtable, which is an owners organization, but architects, engineers, and constructors also belong to that. So this is a good thing. We started moving back toward more of a collaborative nature of working. And then in 1971, we saw the onset of corporate social responsibility. And corporate social responsibility is the continuing commitment by business to behave ethically and force and their families, as well as of the local community and society at large. So all of this is happening in the early 1970s, all the way to the present day. We started to see the disciplines associated with the construction industry coming back under the same tent, not contractually yet, but at least in professional associations, no more segregation. Then we started to see this whole concept of the social contract between business and society. So we're now moving more and more back towards that master builder concept where we are accountable for the whole. And then in 1987, we saw the rise of sustainability as a concept. It appeared for the first time in 1987. And then sustainability concept often was thought of as the green movement, which began in the 1960s, even earlier than the concept of sustainability. But sustainability had often been collapsed into that it was just about energy and the green movement, but it's actually more than that. So we started to see the expansion of what sustainability means. And at the Burn School, our students and what we teach is sustainability is the triple bottom line. So sustainability requires environmental performance, yes, okay, but it also requires economic performance and social performance. So that's that idea of we must be financially sustainable, a project must be financially sustainable, it must be environmentally sustainable, and it must be socially sustainable. Triple bottom line equals sustainability at the Burn School. At the same time, during the same period of time, we started to see design bid build lose ground to other approaches to project delivery. Project delivery meaning how we design and build facilities. So we started by taking design bid build and then creating something called design assist, where the contractor was brought on earlier and began to assist with the design. And then we completely went to design build, which I call traditional design build, which is where the contractor and the designers actually create a team to work together for the client through the entire duration of the contract, through both the design process and the construction process. That's called design build. And then the Design Build Institute of America created a methodology called design build done right. And what that was is really, we kind of combined some of the principles of value and value generation with the technical aspects of the design build process. And we've even gone a step further. We now call it progressive design build, we went one step further to integrated project delivery, which really creates this team, this self-selected team that is committed to work as a single entity, as if they were a master builder. And I actually have taken it personally one step further, and I call it challenge-driven project delivery. And challenge-driven project delivery is really when we start to think about or rethink about our accountabilities, that it's not just program and project that we're accountable for, and therefore our ethics, if you will, are applied to just program and project, but now they're applied to the purpose, why we're doing the project in the first place, and the people associated with it. So we come all the way back to this graphic where now the accountability with integrated project delivery and challenge-driven design build lies also, the accountability lies with the outcomes. What is our outcome? In a hospital, for example, what is our outcome? If our outcome is to improve recovery rates or to diminish or eliminate infection rates, whatever it might be, that we want to be thinking about that outcome while we're designing and constructing, so that we have these outcomes in mind, that we have some kind of an accountability there in mind when we're designing and constructing the project in the first place, working together with the owner. So this is quite a different picture than what I showed you before. What I showed you before is our accountability really was limited to what we were doing, and the only thing we were doing was the construction. And that construction was dictated by the design of the architect. So as long as we did what the architect asked us to do, then we met the requirements of our contract. But were we really taking a holistic perspective when it came to the bigger picture of ethics, the holistic picture of what we're accountable for? So what is the new master builder? And this is really the area of expertise for me. The new master builder is called the Integrated Design Build Team. The Design Build Institute of America actually has a code of professional conduct. Now, you could call this like a code of ethics, and it has to do, again, they're an association of all disciplines: architects, contractors, engineers, owners, attorneys, other service providers like insurance companies, bonding companies. All of those folks can be a member of the Design Build Institute of America. And because of that, they're choosing to all follow the same professional code of conduct. And this is important because now we're seeing more of that holistic accountability. So our ethics, our code of conduct, if you will, encompasses all of the professional services, not just the architects, not just the engineers, not just the attorneys, not just the contractors, but all of us together as a team. And when we think about sustainability moving way beyond green, that it's way beyond the green initiatives and just energy, then we see again that broader perspective that those design build teams or those integrated design build teams have an accountability to something more than just meeting the profitability requirements of our individual contracts, for example. We have an accountability not just to the economic performance of the project, but the social performance of the project and the environmental performance of the project. Also, when we work as this team, we're beginning to think about this as a different kind of construction professional. A construction professional, design and construction professionals, for example, who we are, we kind of make the connection between what the owner's expectations are and its impact, whatever their project is and their expectations for the project, and its impact on the entire ecosystem within a community or a city. So we're that professional now that is just simply has a bigger accountability. And for us to begin to think that way, I'm going to go right back to how I started this presentation when I said construction is big business, that nothing would exist without us. So this new construction professional is a person who understands their impact on the whole. And then finally, as we begin to move towards the close, there's a big business imperative to all this. We're talking about a different way of doing the construction business. I've already talked to you about the design build process, which is very different than the design bid build process. And the design build process is a collaboration, but its purpose is to generate greater value for the client. Its purpose is to hold a larger accountability for not just the project, but the outcomes of the project and how it impacts society, how it impacts the environment, as well as its economic performance. So the point of my presentation today is the concept of taking ethics in construction to the next level. We're talking about going beyond conventional ways of thinking and acting in order to engage in a deeper, more conscious approach to our work and that of our teams and organizations. Real sustainable change and development is rooted first and foremost in the quality of our individual people and collective ethics as an industry. The business of the built environment interconnects social, cultural, economic, financial, political, and ecological factors. As I said from the get-go, construction is a big deal, and we have a big responsibility that's finally come back into the light. The levels of ethical development we go through as individuals is 1, 2, 3, at the number 3 being show genuine interest in the welfare of others and have a deep sense of universal ethical principles that guide that behavior. And that's the movement currently, if you will. It has been for a number of decades, that the construction industry is transforming back to that holistic master builder concept where we do have an accountability for the whole. It had diminished for a period of time back to sort of this number 2 step. Do what is right to maximize personal gain, or do what is right to follow the contract, follow the plans and specs. But it kind of stopped there. Now we're coming back to more of this bigger picture. So how are we coming back? Well, let me introduce you to something called regenerative development. We've already talked about sustainability. Sustainability, at the heart of sustainability is do no harm, okay? That concept is do no harm, so that when we create projects, and we understand the triple bottom line, that's how we define sustainability. And when we create projects, we want to assure economic performance, social performance, and environmental performance. That's what we want to do with sustainability. And we're doing that. It's a technical design system, if you will. It's efficiency, doing things right, technologies and techniques. It's still fragmented thinking, though. Think about it, it's still fragmented thinking. So what we're actually promoting at the Burn School is beyond that. So when I talk about this new professional constructor, we're talking beyond that. We're talking about individuals who are not just interested in doing no harm, but they're interested in restoring and actually regenerating for the future. So the distinction is sustainability means doing no harm, where regeneration means adding value. And what the construction industry is moving to is this adding value concept to its own process for designing and constructing buildings. So that's what design build is about. That's what integrated project delivery is about. It's about adding greater value, not just doing no harm. So this is the direction for the future. This is, in essence, you could think of it as the new ethic for the construction industry as a whole, as an integrated process. So developing this new perspective, what we're talking about is sort of creating a new blueprint for doing this work. And it includes inventory of the existing assets in a community, for example, analyzing patterns, developing principles, again, around what we're trying to accomplish, emerging concepts, synthesizing those concepts, and developing elements that will serve the bigger picture, the community, the society, the economics, and the environment. And then ultimately to design, build, and operate from a regenerative, add value perspective. So our business, construction, many people think it's just about bricks and concrete and steel, but it's not. If you think about it, everybody involved in the construction business, they are building the country, they are building the communities where they actually live. And what do they want those communities to look like? What do they want them to look like? So this is far more than just concrete and steel and bricks. We've actually identified at the Burns School, and professionally I have in a different book that I've written called Design Build Essentials, we've identified what we call integrated project leaders. These are unique construction professionals. They're uniquely qualified. They focus on doing what's right in addition to doing things right. And they are identifiable in the marketplace. They are a distinct professional, or we're trying to make it that way anyway. We also teach our students, for example, the concept of strategic intelligence. And that strategic intelligence starts with a leadership philosophy deeply grounded in ethics, in addition to foresight, visioning, systems thinking, partnering, and motivating and empowering people around us. This is very core to the Burns School education, for example. And then finally, as we get close to the end here, check my time, integrated project leaders. Integrated project leaders start with an elevated perspective of ethics and their role in creating a better world. That's what we're talking about. When I talk about construction ethics, I'm actually talking about a new ethics, if you will, an elevated perspective on ethics. That's the next generation, or the new construction professional. At the Daniels College of Business, it's founded, quite frankly, on ethics, integrity, trust, accountability, transparency, fairness, respect, rule of law, viability. At the Daniels College of Business, we extend beyond a philosophy and a theory to examine the real-world practical application of ethical principles as a framework for decision-making and leadership. So to play the game well is one thing. To play it with style and creativity is even better. But changing the game itself is a different level of play entirely. And that's exactly what we're up to at the Burns School. We are out to change the game. As a matter of fact, we want to be leading in how the game changes in the construction industry. And ethics, again, is at the core of that. We are developing the next generation of leadership, and it's pretty exciting to be involved in all of that, I must tell you. And every year that we graduate a group of students from the Burns School, I can't tell you how proud I am that they've learned an approach to this business, the construction business, that takes them way beyond the traditional models of segregated services, but instead sets them up to participate in and to exceed expectations and be very, very successful in the new integrated models of design and construction that help them lead in the industry. That's all I have for you today, and I hope it was beneficial. I'm going to stop the share here just for a minute and tell you again how happy I am that I was able to do this presentation for you today. I have to apologize a little bit for my throat, but that's the way it is. And thank you so much for joining this, taking a listen. And if you have any questions whatsoever, you can reach me at barbara.jackson@du.edu. Again, thank you very, very much for joining us today.